What's up, vegetable orgasms? So today we're talking about the quads. Quads for the broad. So we're going to talk about exercise selection. We're going to talk about programming, sets, reps, mind-muscle connection, anatomy, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's start with anatomy. If you don't know the function of a muscle, you can't really train it very effectively.
Break the cycle, Morty. Rise above. Focus on science.
Right? So the main function of the quad is to extend the knee. So in a squat, in a leg extension, in any kind of quad movement, there has to be knee extension. Otherwise, you're not really working the quad. You're working something else. That is not the quad. And whenever you're doing a movement, you need to remember that. Knee extension is the name of the game. Now, the quads, or at least some of the quads, one of the quad, is going to be a hip flexor. But for most exercises, you're going to be wanting to focus on knee extension. So, let's get right into the exercises. The number one exercise that I have used to build my quads is the high bar back squat.
Rise up, gonna get higher and higher, woo!
It's also important not just the exercise, but how you do the exercise.
Woo!
If you do your high bar back squat, but you are leaning forward, your torso is going forward, your hips are going back, and your knees aren't really going forward at all, you're doing like a powerlifting style of squat, you're not going to get great results for quads. You need to allow the knees to go forward, which is actually okay. Don't let them like bang into each other. Keep them straight, keep them over the toe, but you can allow them to go forward. This is actually going to be much better for quad growth. You're also going to want to stay fairly upright. If you have long femurs like me, this is going to be more difficult to do. You might want to work on your hip mobility, your ankle mobility. But once you can get into a fairly upright position and allow the knees to go forward, you can use the quads a lot more. Now, you can get some results doing a low bar back squat, but because the bar is further on your back, you're going to be leaned over more, and it's going to be more hips, more glutes, more hamstrings, and less quads, just based on the mechanics of the exercise. Squatting like a powerlifter is not going to be optimal when it comes to leg growth, and if you look at a lot of powerlifters, they do high bar back squats as an accessory movement. If you look at most Olympic weightlifters, they don't do low bar. They do high bar because it's going to be better for quad growth, and it's going to translate into their sport, which is the snatch and clean and jerk, a lot more. You can also elevate your heels on plates or wear squat shoes. I think those are both decent ways of getting more quad activation. Number two is going to be the front squat. So this takes it even further. It's not a low bar, it's not a high bar, but it's actually in front, which allows you to stay even more upright. You can put the knees forward even more, which again is fine. If you have achy knees, maybe not the best, but if you build up to it and you have strong hips and you are not getting any kind of like wobbling, then it should be absolutely fine.
You know what to do with that big fat butt. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Just a little bit of...
So a front squat is going to be even more quad dominant. Now, which is going to be better? A high bar squat or a front squat? It's personal preference. Whichever one you enjoy doing more. Some weird people like front squats more, but most people are going to want to prefer a high bar variation just because it's more comfortable. You can overload a bit more, and there's less core involvement and there's less upper back involvement. For a lot of people, if your upper back is weak, you're going to be collapsing in front squats, and it's going to limit the amount of weight that you can use. And for both front squats and high bar back squats, you're going to want to go down to at least parallel. You don't have to go any deeper than parallel, but typically speaking, if you're squatting well above parallel, that is not going to be great for quad growth, and you're going to want to go at least to parallel. If you can go lower, I think that is a little bit better for growth. Maybe, but I don't think it's going to be spectacularly better for growth. Parallel is where you're going to want to be. If you're doing a quarter squat, don't expect any kind of results. You might get a little bit, but generally speaking, this is just going to mess up your knees more than the muscle, more than the actual quad itself. All right, the next one is going to be the leg press. Now, every leg press machine is going to be a little bit different. Don't think you can leg press this much on one machine and this much on another. It won't always be the same. But one thing that is pretty constant is where you place your feet. Again, how you do the exercise is paramount, and I think more people need to talk about this. If you put your feet high on the pad, it's going to be more hamstrings, more glutes, and just more posterior chain in general, because it is opening the angle of the knee. You're not going to be getting as much knee extension and knee flexion. It's going to be more in the hips. So if you put your feet below, you put them, on the bottom of the pad, or maybe even below that to the very bottom of the pad where your heels are hanging off, you're going to get much more quad activation. Now, every machine is going to be different. I think it can put a little bit more stress on the knees going lower, but you cannot stress the quads without also stressing the knee. It's just not possible. If you're doing a leg extension, a squat, a leg press, anything that stresses the quads is also going to stress the knee. So get it out of your head that you're never going to stress the knees whatsoever. The key is to manage that stress, to do it intelligently with good technique, to make sure the stress is enough that it causes the joint to get stronger, but not so much that you get injured, and then you also put a lot of the stress on the muscle, which is what you are trying to develop. Number 4 is going to be leg extensions. Now, I did a video on this recently, so I'm not going to go too much into detail, but this is a really good way to get full contraction. Both of the exercises already mentioned, squats, leg press, you're not going to have tension in that fully contracted position. Don't try to squeeze your quads on a leg press, because you can actually, there's no tension here, you're just getting forces, so you can actually hyperextend your knee. Same thing on a squat. Don't try to squeeze your quads at the top. However, on a leg extension, this actually makes a lot of sense because the forces are going not through the joint, but at a different angle. Now, this can also stress the knee a little bit, so I recommend not going super heavy. Go lighter than you can and make it more of a metabolic pump type of exercise with higher reps. I would say 10 at an absolute minimum, and usually I'll do like 15, 20, 25, 30, somewhere in that rep range. Yes, it's shitty. It's easier to swing and, put stress on the joint rather than the muscle. But if you're trying to develop the muscle, go slow, focus on what you're doing and actually focus on using the quadricep muscle. Number 4 is going to be a little bit similar. It is a hack squat machine. Now, this is going to be a little bit more quad dominant than anything I've listed here, because due to the angle, you can actually let your knees go way forward and put more stress on the quads with very little stress on the lower back, the glutes, or the hamstrings. There should be basically zero hamstring activation in a hack squat because it is the most quad dominant movement I can think of. Now, again, if you have knee issues, this is going to put more stress on the knee, but also more stress on the quad. So know yourself. If your knees are talking to you, go slow, use a lighter weight, and control the movement. I see so many people, they do something like a hack squat or a front squat, and they're like maxing out and bouncing out of the bottom position, and then they say, oh, my knee got injured, therefore hack squats are bad. No, you're just an idiot, okay? So go slow, go controlled, listen to your body. Don't allow your knees to go every which way. Keep them controlled. The knee is a hinge joint, so it's happy hinging, but if it does any kind of like weird sideways bullshit, it is instantly going to be very, very angry. The next one, goblet squats. I don't do these that much just because it's hard to load them very heavily. And even at the heaviest that my gym has to offer, there are only 40 kilo dumbbells. So really for me right now, this isn't a super challenging weight. But if you're a beginner, I think these are an excellent exercise. Just pop on 10 or 20 kilos, maybe even 30, and just go for a ride, do a lot of reps. Again, because you are very upright, it forces you into good posture, and you can allow the knees to go more forward. You can also elevate your heels on this, as I will put on the screen, and this is going to be a very, very good quad dominant type of squat. It's actually even more quad dominant than a front squat because the weight is not on your clavicles or on your shoulders, it's out in front of you. So this can be a really good way to teach beginners how to squat and get your quads involved in that type of movement pattern. Next up, we have box squats. I always felt these were more of a posterior chain exercise. Basically, what you're doing is you're sitting back onto a box, and then you are standing back up. So there's sort of a break between the eccentric and the concentric movement pattern. And, these are okay. Try them out. I never felt that they were all that great, but, maybe you'll find success with them. If you sit straight down, so not onto a box, but maybe onto a bench that you are straddling, this can be more quad dominant and might be a good option. Next, we have Bulgarian split squats. I think these can be a decent quad exercise. Personally, I feel them mostly in the booty, not the quads. If you take a longer step, it's going to be more hamstrings, it's going to be more glutes. But if you take a shorter step, it's going to be more quads. And so, if you want to develop your quads with this movement, take a fairly short step. Again, the knee angle is going to be more closed, and you're going to get more of the quads actually working. If you take a longer step, it's going to be more hips, and the quads are not going to be as active. The same thing goes for a lunge. If you're taking long steps when you're lunging, a ton of glutes, a little bit of hamstrings, but not that much quads, a little bit of quads. But if you take a short step when you are lunging, that's going to be much more quads. So it just depends on what you want and what feels comfortable. You can modify most of these movements to target different areas, more posterior chain, more anterior chain, or quads if you want to call it that. It just depends on how you do the movement. So don't think that there's any kind of like magical movement or special movement. A lot of it is in the details and exactly what you feel and what your body can actually do and what you connect with and what you can do for a long period of time. Finally, we have deadlifting. So a sumo deadlift might be a little bit of quads due to the knee angle being a little bit more closed. And then a traditional deadlift, a conventional deadlift, is going to be a little bit less quads because the knees start more open, and it's going to be more hamstrings and more spinal erector and more glute. But I think you can maybe develop a little bit of quad growth from deadlifting, but it will absolutely not be optimal. If you want to develop the quads, you should be squatting. Just there's so much more range of motion at the knee. There's an eccentric part of the movement that can be better for growth as well, plus a stretch at the bottom. So if you want to squat, or if you want to develop big quads, squatting is absolutely the way to go. And honestly, you don't need that many quad exercises. I see a lot of websites and books and programs. They give you like 15, 20, 30 different quad exercises. But honestly, I think probably just 5 is going to be enough. Pick a few types of squats, a couple of machines, and maybe one like auxiliary or accessory type of movement, and you are good to go. If a website gives you 30 different squat or quad recommendations, they are absolutely full of shit. A lot of magazines do this. They'll like say 30 different quad exercises or the 30 best quad exercises, which is honestly just stupid. You don't need to confuse the muscle or use endless varieties and variation in order to get results. You need discipline, consistency, progressive overload, and choosing the right exercises, not too many exercises. And, shame on coaches who are putting out a different variety of exercise every single week. If an exercise is new, it's probably shit. Straight up. Now, in terms of sets and volume, a lot of it has to do with how much you can tolerate. So I can't really give a set number. It's up to you to experiment. Let's say you do 10 sets for quads the first week and you feel just trashed. Well, it was probably too much, and you can reduce that and probably still get the same or better results. Maybe someone else will do 10 sets and they'll feel like nothing. Like they won't feel like anything happened at all. They won't see any kind of results, doing 10 sets per week, and maybe they should increase to 15 or 20. And these two people are doing the same amount, 10 sets per week, but what they should actually do is completely different based on their actual feeling and their experience. But just to give you some round numbers, for beginners, in my book, I suggest 3 to 8 working sets per week. For intermediate, 4 to 10, and then for more advanced, 6 to 14. And if you want to specialize in quad growth, perhaps 50% more for that. I think most people aren't going to want to go over around 20 sets per week. That starts to add up quite a bit. There have been studies that showed like 30 sets per week was amazing for quad growth, but realistically for most people, if you're actually pushing the sets close to failure, more than 20 sets per week is just a ridiculous amount to recover from, especially as you get stronger. In terms of rep range, it's really going to vary based on the exercise. For heavy compound movements like squats, probably anywhere from a single rep sometimes, but usually probably 5 and up, to 20 or maybe even 30. Like, you can do sets of 30 on high bar back squats. It's going to suck, but you can do it. Typically though, I would say 5 to 10 for squats is going to be what is ideal for most people, maybe a little bit in the 10 to 15 rep range as well. And then for leg press, I would say 10 to 15 is going to be best. And then for stuff like goblet squats, leg extensions, you're probably looking at 15 to 20, or maybe even a little bit higher. And it just varies based on the person and based on the exercise and, you know, whatever you like to do. If you're a sick motherfucker who likes to do high rep leg workouts, feel free. But for most people, I would say, you know, below 20 reps is going to be more effective most of the time. In terms of mind-muscle connection, honestly, this is one muscle group where it's not that important. For your rear delts, your biceps, your lats, your traps, your calves, a lot of other muscles, I think mind-muscle connection is actually really, really important. But for your quads, especially with like sets of 5 on squats, you're probably not going to feel it in your quads. Okay, you might the day later, but you might not feel like a mind-muscle connection with your quads, and that's totally okay. Now, in terms of injury issues, the main area is going to be the knees and possibly also the lower back. But if you are squatting for quads, lower back is usually not going to be an issue. Usually that's an issue when you're doing like too heavy up deadlifts or maybe like overhead press or something like that. Typically speaking, if you're squatting and you're staying very upright, it's not going to stress the lower back very much. The knees are a little bit tricky. Typically speaking, if you're going to get knee issues, it's because the knees are going in or out. Again, they're a hinge joint and they are very happy to hinge back and forth. So if you're getting like any kind of like weird internal rotation or collapsing inward or valgus twitch and that kind of stuff, that's where you run into issues. Often this is not a quad issue. This is not even a knee issue. This is a hip issue. If your hips are weak, your knees are going to want to do funny things. And so I think strengthening your hips and maybe doing hip mobility type of work, like shown by the YouTube channel Squat University, I think this can be very helpful. A lot of it is just due to technique and to loading and to programming. It's not the actual exercises themselves. It's the execution and the application of them. In terms of programming, I think a lot of people can handle 2 quad-focused workouts per week, but if you find yourself still super sore 3 days later after the quad workout, I think perhaps having one lower body day being more quad-focused and another day being more hinge and hamstring glute-focused, I think that's a good option. You still get a little bit of quad stimulation from deadlifts, from other hinging movements. It's just more focused on the posterior chain. So you have one big squat session per week, and then the other one might be lighter. It might be some leg extensions, it might be goblet squats, it might be lunges, but it's not super all out and taxing. That can be a good way to set it up. If you can handle 2 big quad workouts per week and you're focused on quad growth, I think that can be a good option. Just play it by ear, and most people won't be able to handle 3. 3 is a bit much for most people. Look at that beard. It's so luxurious. It's like the pelt of an ancient mystical beaver. Anyway, that is all for this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, share on social media if it's not too awkward what I just did. And I will see you, hopefully, in that next video. Peace!
That's a pop, that's a pop, that's a pop. Make it sexy, okay? It has to be sexy, otherwise you don't eat.